Hello everyone and welcome to the IFST's Career Sparks webinar on becoming a chartered scientist. My name is Purity Hurishka. I'm a technical manager with Sainsbury's Supermarkets and I'm also a chartered scientist. I've been a chartered scientist since February 2020. Before that, I was a registered scientist from December 2017. A small background to the webinar and why it's being held. As a member of the UK Science Council, IFST is proud to support the ongoing professional development and recognition of individuals working in the food sector. Part of IFST's ongoing effort to inspire excellence and trust in food, our webinar on becoming a chartered scientist is aimed at equipping established food science professionals to take their next step in being recognized for their skills and expertise that they are bringing to the sector. This webinar is being recorded and will be shared on IFST's website. Feel free to make comments and ask questions throughout the webinar using the Q&A function, which should be at the bottom of your screen. This can also be used in the case of any technical difficulties. There will be a Q&A session after the presentation where we will respond to as many of these questions as possible. Our speaker is Ruth Ashai, Registration and Assessment Manager at IFST. She is responsible for coordinating and actively managing the flow of applications for IFST's wide range of membership and other registrations, as well as overseeing the integrity of the professional registers and their associated CPD standards. So without further ado, I will hand over to you, Ruth.
Thank you very much, Purity, for that lovely introduction. Welcome everyone who is joining us live this morning for our IFST Career Sparks webinar on becoming a chartered scientist. I'm Ruth Ashaye. As Purity mentioned in her lovely introduction, I look after the application process at IFST for the Chartered Scientist registration. Part of my role is to support potential registrants, such as yourselves, as well as our assessors, in ensuring that the assessment process is an enjoyable one for both parties, as well as liaising with any queries that arise throughout the application process. So during this webinar, we are going to answer the following questions. Firstly, what is professional registration and why it is something that you should consider throughout your professional career? We will also briefly cover the professional registration pathways available via IFST, but as we have already mentioned, we will be particularly focusing on the Chartered Scientist pathway. And lastly, we will also discuss and see how you can progress with an application by sharing best practice tips on how to prepare your application for the submission. I would like to also highlight that at the end of this presentation, we will have the opportunity to answer your questions about the application process. So please do feel free to leave your questions via the chat option on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen, and we will get back to you in answering as many of your questions as possible throughout the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Right, so let's dive in. So, firstly, what is professional registration? In a nutshell, professional registration is a way of providing an independent recognition of your achievements and of maintaining the exacting standards required in your specialist area. By gaining professional recognition, you are highlighting not only your knowledge, but you are also being recognized for your behavior towards maintaining best practice, as well as demonstrating that you are working at high standards in your professional life. Now, one of the important things about professional registration is that it is awarded by your peers. What this means is that your application is reviewed by individuals working in your area of expertise and who, through your application, are able to recognize your abilities. Therefore, professional registration is a voluntary means of demonstrating your professionalism, because it is involved being held to account by your peers for your abilities and your adherence to ethical standards. So now let's move on to the tangible benefits of obtaining professional registration. Firstly, it provides you with an independent benchmark that contributes to the credibility of your skills and expertise. This is further showcased through the use of postnominals that come from these awards. In our case, for chartered scientists, the postnominals that accompany this recognition is CSci, as you'll see being used throughout the presentation. Also, by being professionally registered, you have the opportunity for further professional development. Such opportunities can include the engagement and broadening of your knowledge, as well as increasing your networks within the industry. There is also the possibility to contribute your expertise on a larger stage and to be involved in reaching out to the next generation of food experts. All of these opportunities are available not only via IFST, but also potentially via your employer and local network of experts. At this point in today's webinar, I would like to take the opportunity to highlight that whilst professional registration is a recognition at an individual level, it also has a much wider impact on the food sector at large. Chartership, as a scientist, reflects the wide variety of sciences and their practice, recognizing high levels of skill and experience independent of the scientific discipline. Chartered scientists represent the best professional scientists working in the UK and abroad. In our case, for the food sector, they demonstrate effective leadership. They also use their specialist knowledge and broader scientific understanding to continue to develop and improve the application of food science and technology. And they do this by scoping, planning, and managing multifaceted projects. This registration tells others that you are committed to working to very high ethical standards, and it gives them trust and confidence in you as a professional scientist. An important aspect to highlight as well at this point is that to maintain this status, registrants commit themselves to meeting continuing professional development requirements, or CPD, each year. On this slide, you are now seeing a snapshot of the varied professional registers that IFST offers in supporting your continuing professional development. We understand that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach to professional recognition and improvement, which is why, to meet the different needs of those working in the food sector, IFST has developed 3 specialist registers, which recognize the varied experience and roles of our membership. As you know, IFST is a licensed body by the UK Science Council, through which we are able to offer the Chartered Scientist, Registered Scientist, and Registered Science Technician qualifications. Depending on your skills and expertise, you can hold multiple registrations, again, reflecting the skills and expertise that you have accumulated and maintain throughout your professional career. However, as highlighted by the title of this webinar, we are going to focus on the Chartered Scientist application pathway. At this point in the presentation, I'd like to take a little bit of a side note to provide a bit further background on the UK Science Council. Some of you in the audience today might be aware and familiar with the Science Council's work, but others maybe not so much. So, the UK Science Council is responsible for providing the quality assurance system for all those working in science. They are responsible for setting the standards of professional registration for all practicing scientists and science technicians working across all the scientific disciplines. Through their licensed bodies, of which IFST is one of them, We work collaboratively to admit onto these registers the scientists and science technicians who meet the competencies and the conduct requirements for these standards. So at this point in the presentation, let's do a bit of a recap on the benefits of Chartered Scientist registration. Firstly, Chartered Scientist denotes high professional standard based on its chartered status. You are also able to use the designatory letters CSci, as shown on the screen, providing public recognition of your knowledge and experience. It is also a way of gaining international recognition, as this award is recognized under the EU directive as shown on screen. As far as we are currently aware by the Science Council, this EU directive remains in place and is applicable to chartered scientists based in the UK. Right, so in this next part of today's webinar, we are going to talk through the nitty-gritty, so to speak, of making an application towards chartered scientist. So firstly, who can apply for this recognition? If you are making an application via IFST, you will need to be working and have experience of working in the food sector. You'd also need to have a combination of scientific qualification and a number of years' experience for this registration. As part of your day-to-day role, you will also need to be applying scientific knowledge and skills to find solutions to the complex challenges that arise in your role. I would like to highlight at this point that in the event that prospective registrants do not hold a level 7 or above qualification, by this we mean a Bachelor of Science, then there is an additional step that is required, and this is via a Chartered Scientist Equivalence Report. Now, please do not be alarmed. The purpose of this report is simply to provide supplementary evidence that you have gained the equivalent knowledge to a level 7 qualification, so equivalent to a Bachelor of Science threshold, through work-based learning. Again, if you are unsure if this applies to you or not, you can always reach out to IFST, and you will also have my details at the end of today's webinar. So, I understand that in this next slide there is quite a lot of text, but please don't be alarmed. Again, if you are applying for chartered scientist, then the column that you need to focus on is the one labeled CSci, and we will go through the 5 competency areas in more detail. Okay, so applicants for chartered scientist need to demonstrate competency across 5 different areas. These being application of knowledge and understanding, personal responsibility, interpersonal skills, professionalism, and professional standards. So, guidance on what the assessors will be looking for under each competence is provided within the guidance notes available on our website, but also you can request them via email. So before starting working on your application, make sure you read through the whole application first and start to think about any valid examples from your professional life that describe and showcase how you meet these individual competencies. So, other tips to bear in mind when compiling your applications includes when thinking about how to structure your answers, you will need to think about examples of your experiences in terms of what you did, how you went about it, and also why you did it. Remember, the assessors do not know you, do not may not be familiar with your particular role. So it is important that in your answers you signpost these different areas, but also highlight why it is you've chosen this particular example. Another thing to keep in mind is that you should think about using examples that are fairly recent, that is from the last 5 years, although you can draw on relevant experience from further back in your career. You can also use and refer to a particular example more than once. However, please do ensure that you make it clear how and why it applies to a competence. From managing different applications through the process, it is best to not use the same example more than twice. The reason being that otherwise, the assessors reading your application will not be able to fully understand the breadth of your experience and skills by yourself limiting your answers to just a handful of examples. You can also use examples from your broad professional experience, but you must be able to show how you have applied these skills that you have developed in your role. In terms of the length of answers, we expect them to be around 100 to 150 words, which we find is sufficient for each competency to be described and signposted as to how this example meets the competency criteria that is being requested. However, this is not always the case, so it can be that for certain parts of the application, a deeper level of detail will be required. When structuring your answers, it is also important to include outputs as well as the inputs related to each competency. I would also like to highlight at this point that as part of the application, you do not need to provide details of confidential projects. Again, we do not need to see reports or project case studies and things like that, which is why it is important to take your time in writing and composing your application. And on that note of tips on how to submit a successful application, here's a few more things to think about and to make note and be very conscious of when completing your application. So, one of the things is to think about at least 3 to 5 examples minimum from your work life. The reason for this is that if you keep using the same example to answer different areas of the application form, then the implication that that is giving to the assessors is that you do not currently meet the requirements of this registration because you do not yet have the breadth and depth of experience and skills required for this level of recognition. Another item to think about is also important to be brief. And by this, we mean that after you've written your response, read it back and think about whether an assessor would be able to visualize what your role is. If they can't, you have not provided enough detail. Another thing to keep in mind is that when you are composing your answers, it is important to provide depth. By this, we mean it isn't just about what you did, it's about how and why you did it. Within this example that you've chosen for that particular answer. Remember that you can only be awarded registration when our assessors are sure that you know the impetus behind the results of your work. Another thing which is very common in applications is the use of we, plural, as opposed to I. Now, It is very common to default into the third person when expressing and describing a situation. However, when submitting an application for chartered scientist, this is not the case. And actually, it is now your time to shine. Remember that we are awarding registration to you and not your team. So if in all your explanations you are describing it as a team effort, that will not result in a successful application. The reason being that you need to be clear on what your individual role was in that particular challenge that you are using as an example within your application. If your entire answer is referencing us and we rather than I or me, then you will need to reformulate what you've written. Another aspect to keep in mind when completing your application is the need to demonstrate that you understand the difference that your work has made long term. If you have improved a procedure, what does this mean actually in real terms? And how do your colleagues benefit? What happens to the standard of your results? Again, it is about that level of reflection in terms of how you rose to the challenge and how your actions addressed that challenge. Remember that the competency aspect of this application is broken into 5 sections, as previously highlighted earlier in the webinar. It is important to read the section heading thoroughly before you write your response. You need to make sure that you have fully absorbed what it is asking and to think about how you are going to structure your answer in order to showcase that particular competency. So now to summarize, the items you need in order to compile an application for chartered scientist are the following. So the first one being the competency report, again, keeping in mind all that I've covered earlier in the webinar. What is also important is to provide an up-to-date CV to support your application. Please include details of your roles and responsibilities held throughout your food career, because again, this feeds into the assessment criteria for this registration. We will also need a copy of your highest qualification or qualifications. And last but not least, the details of one referee to support your application. At this point, I'd like to add that it is important to let your nominated referee know that they will be contacted by IFST to provide a reference in support of your application. So please do speak to the individual that you are wanting or think would be a good fit to support your application. This can be anything from a line manager through to a peer, either within your company or within the food sector. Again, what the referee will be asked by IFST is to state that the information that you are providing in your application is indeed true and factual, and also to provide us with another perspective on your skills and expertise. So once you've compiled your application and you are happy to submit and proceed with it, do send it to me directly via email, and my address details are currently on the screen in front of you. At the point of submission, we will review your application and we will also get in touch if we need any additional supporting information. Please note that the assessment process does take between 6 to 8 weeks from start to finish. And one of the stumbling blocks for this timeline is requesting a reference. So again, do make sure that you've contacted your referee and they are aware that IFST will be in touch with them. Again, at any point throughout the application process, please do get in touch if you have any questions regarding how to complete the competency report. Myself and the team are here to help you.
Thank you, Ruth, for providing us with an overview of the application process and eligibility for this registration. We'll now move to a Q&A session. And just a reminder, you can submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. You may have to hover or touch your screen to submit. So first question for you, Ruth.
Mhm.
What are the requirements for a referee in the UK for an applicant?
Yes. So in terms of a referee, again, one of the main things is they cannot be related to you, or indeed report to you. So it needs to be someone who you report to, or is someone maybe senior within your company, who has direct knowledge and comes into direct contact with you as part of your work. It can also be, however, someone who works similarly in the industry, but is a peer. So again, maybe a colleague that you've worked on a project either recently or in the recent past. And again, please let them know that you are thinking of nominating them as a referee, because again, we will be in touch with them. And that sometimes causes a bit of an issue because they might not be aware. And then IFST drops an email in their inbox.
Yeah, a very good point. A very good point there. Yeah, so we've got another question which I will take. And this is, can food safety culture development be considered as an achievement? I would say absolutely, so long as you can articulate what you did and how it relates and how you met those competencies which are required for the application. I don't know if you want to add more on that, Ruth.
Exactly. I mean, I completely agree with you, Purity, on that matter. It is about articulating how that development went, and your involvement in maybe pushing that development within the company culture.
Yeah, absolutely. So questions are coming through.
Yes.
The next one is, can PhD students apply for the CSci certification if they meet the outlined competencies?
Yes and no. So it depends when you are undertaking your PhD and how much hands-on experience the PhD itself has. Again, it is not to diminish the work that you're doing as a PhD student, but maybe it can be something that you apply for later on in your career. The reason why I'm being cautious is because the register itself is asking for experience and examples of you working on the ground, essentially. And therefore, if you are maybe, depending on where you are in your academic life, whether you've gone straight on to do a PhD straight after your undergrad, then we wouldn't necessarily think that applying for chartered scientist at that point is going to be of benefit, but it's something that you can certainly do after maybe 2 or 3 years working on the ground. Again, PhDs take on different formats. It's one thing if it's more of an academic PhD, it's another thing if it's a PhD that you're undertaking whilst working. Again, there's many combinations. And I would suggest if you're unsure where you fit in, do reach out, and we can provide assistance and maybe guidance as well as to when making an application might be suitable. The last thing we want is for you to pour your heart out into compiling this competency report, and then the final result being that it's not going to be awarded, because that can then have it can feel that it can feel quite bad. But again, it's not, the process isn't about putting you down, but rather it is about reflecting your skills and expertise. So whilst maybe chartered scientist might not be the right registration at this point in time, it doesn't mean that it's not going to be further on in your career.
Yeah, thanks, Ruth. So the next one is asking, how long does the qualification last? Do you have to apply each year?
No. So this is a misconception that can sometimes arise with these types of registrations. So you do apply once. However, if you are awarded if you are successful in being awarded the recognition, then you are actively committing to meeting 35 hours minimum of CPD type activities. Now, what CPD is varies from individual, not only on an individual basis, but also on a year-on-year basis, depending on how your career is developing. What might happen as part of your active registration, what will happen is that we do what we call an audit of our registers, and each year we select a random number of registrants to submit their CPD report. So this is why it's important to keep a record of your CPD. And in order to support you with that, IFST does provide an online CPD platform. And maybe Purity, you can also provide some experience as well from being a chartered scientist yourself about using this platform as well.
Yeah, I find it quite useful because you've got that framework. So it's very useful, and it gives you that chance to reflect, because learning experts, what they recommend is the best way to learn anything is through learning it like you'd teach someone else. So having to keep a CPD ensures that you learn in such a way that you have to go complete the form online. So I find it very useful.
Mm-hmm. And just as well, is it a lot of time? Is it time consuming?
It does take some commitment. I wouldn't say it's massively a lot of time. For my one, I do it at least once a month. So what I do is whenever I attend an event, I just have to make sure that I keep record of all those events. And if I read something which I think is relevant to my chartership, then I will record it for future use when I'll go to log on my professional development. Yeah.
Brilliant. And I see here we have a question about your own experience as well as being a chartered scientist.
Yes. What I would say is, like I said, I find it quite useful from the simple fact that I've got the framework to work with. I don't have to create something else. So that framework and the learning requirements to maintain the CPD, I find them, it's a guide for me. And what I've done is I have incorporated my professional development into my personal development. So I approach development holistically, both from a professional view and also from personally. So it's I like it, like I said, because I've got that framework. And just going back, the application process on that's one of the things I found very useful. Because again, it was an opportunity to reflect at a higher level what I do and what I'm an expert on. And to be honest, being assessed and awarded the chartership by my very experienced peers it boosted my self-esteem that you know, they recognize that I have the skills. So it was
yes.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, as we're saying, especially now with working remotely and things, it does feel like we're working in silos and not being part of a wider community. So as you're saying, the fact that it is assessed by your peers, it does mean that you are being recognized for what you've achieved. And again, it's not it doesn't stop there, so to speak. You've been awarded, and now it's something that you are continuing to do on a day-to-day basis, as we've said.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you've got that opportunity to reflect, because I think we can get hung up on tasks that we do, but we don't step back and reflect and think how it contributes to the bigger picture. Yeah.
Yes. So yes, it is a good time to actually step back and see all that you've achieved when you're writing your report.
Yeah.
It is a matter of celebration. So I'm just looking through at some of the questions that we have. So one of the questions is about referees. So yes, again, different careers can span different workplaces. And when it comes to choosing a referee, it doesn't need to be someone who has been with you every step of the way throughout your career. It simply means it needs to be someone who is aware of what you've done, and when requested can actually say that you work at a high level, you have high standards of you work toward, you have a high level of commitment towards what you do, and as well can verify that you are who you say you are. Again, it is a single referee, and maybe the word referee isn't the right word. It's more of a supporter. So someone who is aware of your work, has knowledge of how you work on a day-to-day level, and can actually support that application.
Yeah, and just to add on that, for instance, when I did my registered scientist and also for my chartership, I gave my line managers the referee, which again, they know what you do and how you do it.
Exactly. And again, I'm assuming that, depending on how your work life evolved, the line manager that you provided as a referee wasn't wasn't the same person of, your previous role, for example.
No. So for the registered scientist, it was in a previous company, and for my chartership, it's actually my current line manager who did the referencing for me.
Brilliant. So I hope, yes, on the referencing side, it is clear. Again, if you are unsure of who might be best to support your application, again, do reach out to myself and the team, and we will be able to provide guidance.
Yeah, there's a good question here, which asks, do we need to apply to be registered scientists first? And how do we do this before we can be chartered scientists?
Yeah, so this is again another misconception. Whilst there is, again, within the level of within the Science Council register, there are 3 tiers. There is the first tier is registered science technician, followed by registered scientist, and then chartered scientist. Now, these aren't necessarily a step-by-step levels that you need to progress to get to chartered scientist. The reason being that roles within the industry vary, and whilst you might be a senior technologist, it might not necessarily translate to chartered scientist. It might translate to another level of registration within the Science Council registers. So in some cases, as with Purity, in her case, she started off as a registered scientist, but then her career progressed to such an extent that chartered scientist was then a much better fit in terms of the skills and expertise that she's achieved. And I know I'm speaking on your behalf, Purity, but what would you say that's a fair reflection?
Yes, absolutely. And again, I would suggest probably it might be worth having a look at the framework that you shared earlier on, which shows the requirements, and then gauging yourself on where you fall. And then, of course, consulting you to see whether with the experience that an applicant has, whether they fit within the register that they are thinking of joining. Yeah, I hope that answers. So there is a question here. And the question is, if somebody has not graduated yet, but they've submitted their master's dissertation, can they apply anytime after graduating?
Yes. So again, in terms of submitting an application after graduating, whether it's at a bachelor level, at an undergrad level, master's or PhD level, the important thing about this register is, again, the experience. So if you are someone who has gone through, pardon me, an undergrad, subsequently a master's, and then maybe straight on to a PhD, which can be the case, if there isn't enough elements of hands-on experience, then making an application might not be possible, simply being that you haven't accumulated enough experience on the ground in order to answer the questions. So again, it isn't something that is not possible at this point, but rather it's something to strive towards as your career progresses. The basis of this register is experience. And from reading the requirements, knowledge itself is a very small part of the application. And I think, Purity, you can attest to that as well. It is more asking you how a particular challenge presented itself and what you did.
Yeah, the way I see it is more of a, so you've gained your knowledge from uni, you have your scientific knowledge, it's how you apply that to solve problems out there in the industry. So it's an application of your scientific knowledge. That's why why the experience really comes in, and that's why it's so heavy. Yeah.
So it is one of those registers that without experience, you will find it very hard to complete, even in the first instance, because whilst you might have some maybe placement experience as part of your academic qualifications, it might not be enough, because again, it is a quantity of time spent on the ground.
Yeah, and again, I think probably to give a rough idea on the requirements and just to see how much experience is needed, it might be worth looking at the requirement deck. Yeah.
So we have now another question about years experience, and if there is a minimum number of years experience. I would say there isn't a minimum or a maximum number of experience. What would you say, Purity?
Yeah, it's about, it's not in terms of years. It's just within, you can have 2 years, but you've done so much and
Exactly.
you meet all the competencies that are required. So it's not in years, it's the experience that you've gained. Because you can have 20 years and not have done much.
Exactly. So, whilst it does feel like a contradiction to what we've said before, the experience is important, but it is the quality of that experience
Yeah.
So how many challenges you've faced, but also how you've overcome them. So if you are someone who is an established professional, but maybe haven't thought about making an application, I would recommend thinking about the last 5 years of your professional career and thinking what type of challenges you've come across. And in doing so, referencing to the application document as well.
And when you think about that, the 5 questions, the 5 questions in the competencies, they are situational.
Yes.
You go by situation. It doesn't ask you when exactly that happened. So you can be able to demonstrate some of these things. I don't know, within even 2 years. It depends on what you've been doing.
Exactly. We have now a question about cost. So yes. So in order to join a Science Council register, you need to be a member of a professional body, in this case, IFST. So you can join as an associate member or fellow, again, depending on where you are in your professional life. But also as well, there is an ongoing registration fee that comes along with this once you've been approved and successfully awarded the Chartered Scientist Award. So on a yearly level, there are 2 membership fees that come into play, the IFST membership and the Chartered Scientist registration.
Yeah.
And I'd like to note if the use of the post-nominals is tied to having an active registration. So if payments lapse, then you will receive notification from IFST asking you to that this has now lapsed and to please refrain from using the post-nominals. As part of our commitment and our requirements under the Science Council, we give them an update as to who remains current on the register and who isn't. And this then feeds back into the online live register that Science Council have on their website. So if you are stating that you are a chartered scientist on any professional documentation, anyone can go and check that if that is indeed the case.
Thanks, Ruth. We've got one more question here, which I'll take. So this is can we add application of scientific knowledge to improve process, e.g. to improve shelf life, developing new products as an example? Absolutely, yes. Because if you follow the STAR method of bringing to life what you've done. So you've got your situation, and then what was your task, you personally, not as a group, and how did you do it, why did you do it, and what was the outcome? So yeah, you can use that as an example. So
I'm seeing here regarding CPD requirements. Do you have to create different CPD requirements in addition to those for other registrations? So you can be you can hold professional registration, not just from IFST, but also with other professional bodies. Again, depending on how your career has evolved and also depending on the place you work. So for example, you can be a chartered scientist with IFST because you're working in the food sector, but maybe you're also a member of the Society for Microbiology, for example, because you have a background in microbiology and you work in the space where microbiology meets food science. So for example, in food safety. The CPD requirements are broadly the same. Again, it isn't about adding more personal admin work, but rather bringing it together. So we have guidance on our website as to what CPD is, and you'll notice that these are very similar to other professional bodies out there. So you can attend maybe a conference in designated for microbiology, for example, but that is still learning. So that can still meet the CPD requirements for chartered scientist with IFST, which is and from your experience, Purity, regarding different CPDs.
Yeah, like I said, I keep, to be honest, I keep this CPD, and it's what I use even for work-related development. So in terms of fulfilling my CPD requirements, so it's not just a case of attending conferences. So there is also training, work-related, work-based training. And so just expanding on these, if you've got 2 registrations with the IFST, for instance, I think, and again, Ruth, you can maybe expand on these. There is only one CPD dashboard that you use for that. You wouldn't have for a food safety manager to have a different CPD to keep, and for a chartered scientist, it's one dashboard, because the requirements, the learning outcomes that are required, they're very similar.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I couldn't put it better myself. CPD is CPD. And what these professional registrations do are simply a recognition of the skills and expertise that you hold. In some cases, it can be broad. In other cases, it's not just broad, but there's also niche experience that you've attained throughout your career.
Yeah, we've got one more here. I worked in the food industry for 20 years and did my PhD, and now work in higher education teaching food. My food industry experience is now more than 5 years old. Will drawing on the academic food related experience be okay?
A tricky one. Just thinking off the top of my head, it depends what type of work you are doing in higher education when it comes to teaching food. If it's teaching based, or if there's also a research element based to it as well. If that's the case, then do reach out, and we can certainly have a conversation as to which maybe professional register best reflects your current skills and expertise. I wouldn't say no, but I would be hesitant to say yes, simply because it is limited information that we're going on at this point. But again, careers vary. Professional life isn't one straight line. It has multiple ups and downs, couple of turns, but that doesn't mean that you do not qualify, or that experience doesn't meet the register requirements. It simply may be thinking about how to frame it. Again, with these types of application, it is important to take your time reading the guidance and thinking about your expertise, and then composing it. It can sound daunting because it is time consuming, but, and Purity, do confirm or not, it is a worthwhile exercise, but it is lengthy.
It is. I would say for my chartered scientist, it was not as lengthy as for the registered scientist. I think purely because of my inexperience when I did the application first time. And there was quite a lot of going back and forth, because I had not fulfilled the requirements. I couldn't articulate that well what were my experiences. But on this question, I would say it's again, how you articulate your experiences to fit within the requirements for the register.
Yes, definitely. And you don't feel like you're alone. Again, do ask for help from your peers, but also as well, if you're maybe unsure, do reach out to myself and my colleagues as well. We do want it to be a positive experience, because it is a celebration of all that you've achieved so far. And again, it's not the end, but rather a milestone along the way. And
absolutely.
it is a worthwhile exercise, whilst it can be a bit of a pain, as Purity you've mentioned.
Yeah, but it's worthwhile in the end, and it builds a very useful experience, I can tell you that, because in today's world, if you go for an interview, you're expected to be able to use the STAR method when you articulate your experiences.
Yes.
So it was very good. And I would say at the beginning, I was not experienced. I couldn't articulate well enough. And in my trying to demonstrate my experience, I had written quite lengthy. I had written essays on it, but then it kept being sent back and I had to review. So it's a good experience. Yeah, you get that.
Yes, so no, certainly, and like we said, it is we do support applicants throughout the process. It isn't, we do provide feedback on applications that we receive, so it's not so in the case where maybe certain questions aren't clear, it's not that you'll receive an email saying this isn't working. You will get feedback as to which areas maybe need more work, and the opportunity to discuss the resubmission is available. So it is something worthwhile. And as a registrant myself with another professional membership body, it is time consuming. It's one of those things, we can't dodge that. It is time consuming.
But yeah, once you do it, there is that initial time commitment. But once you do it, it will be just a case of then commitment to your continuous lifelong learning, I call it.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's it for questions. So yes, thank you very much, Purity, for joining us this morning, and thank you to everyone as well for joining us. If you have any questions that maybe you feel haven't been answered, do send an email, and the details are on screen.
Finally, we would like to remind those of you who are not familiar with IFST that you can find useful resources on our website, including our COVID-19 Knowledge Hub, online FST magazine, as well as information on current and future events such as Members Week, which is coming up in the next couple of days. We welcome new members, so please check our membership benefits page on the IFST website. Thank you again to everyone for attending today, and goodbye.